going to give you a very quick rundown of all the different parts of the wall chart. As mentioned, the wall chart is a great overview of the entire foundation of music theory. So rather than having to thumb through the book, it's all laid out for you. That's what music theory is. And it fits on an 18 by 27 wall chart. It's the foundation. Of course, we could fill many, many wall charts with the various deep places that music theory can go and all these different styles, and there's historical and stylistic aspects to it. And it's really a never-ending, beautiful study. But this, what you have in front of you, is the foundation, and it's laid out on the fretboard for you. I included a picture of a piano keyboard with the notes written on top of it, as well as a picture of the bass fretboard. It's very important to understand how notes relate. The relationship between an E and an F is a different one than between an F and a G or an F and a G sharp, for example. And it's really important that we have some sort of visual representation in our mind so that we can quickly access how various notes relate. The keyboard, the piano, is color-coded and also has the advantage over the bass that each and every note only shows up once. So we can clearly see how notes relate. On the bass, a few notes show up more than once, and having these different options can be confusing if we're trying to figure out how notes relate. On the piano keyboard, there was enough room to fit all 21 note names. If you include double sharps and double flats, there should be 35, but that got a little crowded. Now, the bass fretboard didn't fit all potential note names. That got too crowded and too confusing to look at. So we took the outer strings and added sharps and flats where appropriate. And we also color-coded them by making some of the notes putting some of the notes in a black circle to correlate with the piano keyboard. Intervals. Make sure to check out my interval formula video that will explain the numbers in the colored boxes, as well as how the colors of the arrows and the fingering numbers relate to those boxes. Intervals are the smallest building blocks of music and are really important to understand and be able to finger on the fretboard. Triads and chords. These fretboard diagrams for the triads are absolute must-knows. You must have them under your fingers. There are good fingerings listed here and explanations how these triads are built and also what they sound like in a harmonic context. For the chords, the same thing. I also explained why they are named the way they are in the table that's included, as well as how they're properly named. The most common ways how you might encounter them in real books or lead sheets in terms of the chord symbol. And I also included, again, the sound, which I think is a very important part to familiarize yourself with that whole universe of sounds and how the bass fits into that. Now, when I say sound of the triads or the chords, that's typically meant the sound as in played at the same time. But you want to be able to recognize that so that you get better with taking chords off the recordings and not just only focusing on the root. As for chords, we're not listing alterations, extensions, polychords, sus-chords, those types of things. But by knowing the general structure of a chord, how it's built, and by also knowing your intervals, you can make your way there and figure this out on your own. This is all in the book. Scales. What's important to me is that you know how every single note within the scale relates to the root. In my view, that's the best way to be able to build a scale, as well as to know what it's going to sound like if you know how every single note within that scale relates to the root. That's what those 4 diagrams are there for on the top of scales. I think that's a better way to go than whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, which is very prone to error and which is very hard to reproduce on the fly and doesn't really help if you want to improvise or create your own grooves using scalar material. Much better to have the shape under your belt and understand, using the intervals, which we already know, to build the scale. Rules for naming. Even if you don't know the cycle of fifths, which is typically used to tell you how to correctly name scales, These 4 rules will give you a great head start to always name scales correctly. So make sure to have a look at them. And why do we need to know this? Well, you do want to know that a G sharp major, for example, is a beast with a ton of sharps, including double sharps, whereas an A flat major is not so bad. It only has 4 flats. So naming scales correctly makes good sense and makes theory easier. By practicing this, you will understand this and it will indeed make your life easier. Whereas maybe now if this is new to you, you might just be thinking, why do I need this? Doesn't matter. G sharp, A flat. But once you build the scale and once you build the scale correctly and once you are able to always relate the note to the root, you will want to use it correctly because you know your intervals. They make sense. A good friend of mine always says playing in a different key feels like to be in a different country. And I can very much relate to that. It becomes a visceral flavor to play in F sharp major versus G flat major. They are the same notes. They sound the same, but they feel differently because we relate to them in music theory terms correctly. How major and minor scales relate. That is very important to me also that you understand because it cuts your learning effort in half. If you know something really well in G major, well, then you also know it in E minor because they are related. They share the same tonal material. They just relate to a different root. That's laid out in the section how major and minor scales relate. And this wonderful shortcut that I show you with the bass string photographed where you have under your first finger you have the minor, under your pinky you have the major, and that's how you can find how they relate. Now knowing what I just said is a different beast than actually being able to do it. That's why I listed a whole bunch of examples right below that photo where we're actually putting that into action. The relative minor as well as the parallel minor. The relative minor, they share the same tonal material. The parallel minor, they share the same root, but not the same tonal material. Important distinction. So we're having some exercises there for you in store. See next video, the video with the exercises. Pentatonic scales, just like major and minor scales relate, the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic relate as well. Pentatonic material is a crucial skill set for the bass player. So here I laid out for you how major and minor relates, what the tonal material is of each. And since the blues scale is so related to pentatonics, I fit in the major blues scale as well as the minor blues scale, otherwise known as just the blues scale. There's a major version and a minor version. So that's right there in the chart as well. The blues. Lots of you guys will be jamming, will be going to jam sessions. The blues is always something that'll come up. There is a brief formula included in the chart. It's also in the book. It's the so-called quick change blues. It is a blueprint, a blues print, if you will, that puts into a easily rememberable format how the blues changes work. There are lots of variations that come from that blueprint, but it's great to know this structure. The modes, my super shortcut way to modes. We're starting them all from the same note. We're not moving it around where the root always changes. We're starting them all from the same root. If you do this in a few keys, as I will be showing you in the video on exercises, you will have a great handle on modes, what they sound like, and it will be then easy for you to find creative uses in the music you play because you'll have them under your fingers and understand what they do. The cycle of fifths is a wonderful practice tool. It is also at the root of a lot of music. That's something we like to forget. But if you just have a blues, the blues is right out of the cycle. The bass strings are right out of the cycle. So we want to get used to the cycle as much as possible for a variety of reasons. It's used commonly to tell you how many sharps or flats are in a key. I think that's fair and good, but I prefer actually using my 4 shortcut ways on how to name scales. That just gets you to pretty much the same result. But the cycle is a wonderful way to organize the notes. We are playing all 12 notes through the cycle. If we're going to the left and come back around, we're going up in 4, C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, or F sharp, B B, E, A, D, G. And then if we know that C flat also occurs right next to B, and C sharp also occurs right next to D flat, then we have all important major keys. And we can do the same exercise with what we have right inside the cycle. Those are the minors. I consider the diatonic cycle one of the most important and empowering pieces of music theory that you can have under your belt. Why? Because it shows up in music so much. If you have a kid's song, you're going to have a 5-1 in it. If you have a blues, you have a 4-5-1 in it. There is a formula. If you step through an entire scale in fourths, you will be coming out with the number 147-36251, which is basically the phone number of the diatonic cycle. Any questions about that? Read the chapter in the book on the diatonic cycle. I consider this vitally important and encourage you to practice the diatonic cycle in all keys. In my 20-unit course, Music Theory for the Bass Player, we are practicing the diatonic cycle in every single key, all across the fretboard in different styles, in different ways, with different assignments to keep it fresh, to keep it fun, to keep it interesting and creative for you. So if you're interested in that, Music Theory for the Bass Player, the course. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can use the wall chart as a shortcut to get a super powerful practice in. Stay tuned.